Hello and welcome, everyone. We've got what looks like a really exciting large crowd today. So I'm going to give us a minute for everyone to fill into our Zoom room here. Really excited to see everyone. As the crowd kind of comes into the room here, I'm going to do a very brief little bit of housekeeping. Hi, and welcome to Alta Asks Live. My name is Beth Spotswood, and I'm Alta's digital editor. Today, we're going to discuss secret, unknown, and lesser known locales and weird Western spots with explorers, bon vivants, general experts on funky California and the West, Paul Saffo and Will Hearst. Among other endeavors, Paul is a futurist, a professor at Stanford University, and an EMT. And when he can, in his limited spare time, Paul actually participates in search and rescue operations involving lost hikers and climbers. Talk about secret spots of the West. Will is publisher and editor of Alta Journal, as well as chairman of the Hearst Corporation. Will interviewed Paul on this very subject, the Hidden West, for the current issue of Alta. And so we're going to toss you a link to that article in the comments. While I have you, and quickly, if you are new to Alta and unfamiliar with us, we are an award-winning quarterly magazine focused on California and the West. If you like what we do here today, and you like Will and Paul, who are frequent, Will founded Alta, please do check out our website, altaonline.com. You'll be signed up for our newsletter, which is free. It comes every Thursday. So I hope you'll check us out and enjoy us. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask questions of Will and Paul. We also really want to hear your ideas and suggestions for secret and hidden California spots, or even throughout the West. So let us know. We're going to chat for about 30 minutes today and then get to as many of your questions as we can. This interview will be recorded and posted to altaonline.com later today, and we'll shoot you an email with that link. Lastly, I'm zooming in from Novato, California. Please let us know where you're watching from in the chat so we can kind of see where the crowd is coming from today. So with that, I'm really excited to welcome Paul and Will. Thank you guys so much for taking the time and joining us for Alta Live.
Thanks, Beth.
So let's begin. Before we're going to do a slideshow of a number of secret and hidden spots of the West. But first, Will and Paul, and Will, let's start with you. But the same question for both of you. What sparked your passion for discovering and exploring hidden corners of the West? Can you talk a little bit about what about it feels so special, and if this interest is specific to the West?
Yeah, I was inspired. Part of Alta's inspiration was the Mountain Gazette that was edited by Michael Moore, and Rob Schulteis wrote about some slot canyons near Page, Arizona, that you could explore, and you can still explore them, but you need to have a Navajo guide to get access to these slot canyons. So I thought this was something that had been there all along, but was kind of a hidden feature of the West. And then he wrote a book called The Hidden West, and that's where the title of this sort of idea came from. But it's just been my experience that if you like the Western states, if you feel that there's something sort of interesting and powerful and magical about the geography, you kind of explore a little bit. Maybe you drove out here, maybe you've driven around. And so I thought most of the people that live out here have the experience of coming across something or being turned on to something. Maybe it's the first time you went to Yosemite, but you suddenly kind of get the amazing majesty of the kind of Western landscape. The East has its own magic too, but it's much more uniform and kind of European in its presentation, whereas the West is this wild, bigger, large, symphonic kind of experience. So I wanted to see if there were places that Paul knew about or other people knew about. If it's super hidden, we probably shouldn't talk about it because it should stay hidden and isolated. But there are some places that take a little bit of work to go visit, but it's worth it. And I thought it would be fun to compare notes.
Paul.
Will pretty much said it all. I mean, I just love finding secrets and love sort of this marvelous palimpsest of the California landscape, that there's stories behind every rock, it seems. And as a kid, a neighbor conned me into convincing me that there was a Lost Dutchman gold mine in our neighborhood. And I kept looking for it as a kid and never found it, but did find some nice rock crystals and the like. But everywhere you drive, that there's a story behind something. And I just find that wonderful. So, I think it was Edward Weston who said, I want the deeper mystery of things revealed. I would second that, but after they've been revealed, don't tell anybody about them.
Well, let's get started with some kind of visual component to this. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go through a little bit of a slideshow. Also, I just want to give a shout out to the person tuning in from London who wins the award from the furthest visitor to this. But we've got a huge crowd today, and it's exciting to see so many people from all over California and the West. Welcome, welcome. All right, here they are. Will and Paul, we're gonna kick this off with Pluto's Cave. Paul, have you ever had to rescue anyone from Pluto's Cave? How did this make your list?
Oh no, Pluto's Cave it's a wonderful lava tube that everybody can visit. It's in the park. It's not exactly a deep secret, but at that corner of California is way off the beaten path, and it's kid friendly, so you can tell your kids all sorts of lies about it before you go in.
Hey, Paul, where is it? Is it near Shasta?
It's up in Lava Beds National Monument.
Never been there.
There you
See,
go.
it's a secret.
Exactly. Okay, so this is the Black Butte Trail. And what's so kind of special about this? Why should we head here? It's near Weed, California.
That's right off of Highway 101. People are like mountain goats. They always want to be on the highest point. And so it's right in the shadow of Shasta, and most people miss it. But this is, again, a place where you can climb up to the top of the Butte. It's a nice little hike, fabulous view of Shasta. The downside to climbing Mount Shasta, apart from it being a lot of work, is that when you're on top of it, you can't see it. Well, this gives you a panoramic view of Shasta, and it's a lot less crowded than trying to climb Shasta. So it's hidden right in plain sight.
Yeah, it's an interesting place. I've driven past it, and if you're on Highway 5 going towards Oregon, you come across it, and it's just this isolated little thing that looks like the mountains of the moon, and that there's no possible way to get to the top. But all the local people told me that there's a trail, and now in your plan view, I can see there actually is a trail. So that's cool.
Right, and I was wrong. Highway 5, not 101. Will's right, as usual.
Let us know in the chat, by the way, everyone, if raise a hand of who's been to each of these places we visit. Okay, Paul Saffo. Artwork by Paul here.
Artwork. I took this picture for real. No, so the wonderful thing about Shasta is that there's this whole thing that the Lemurians live in an underground city beneath Shasta. And while it's, of course, a new age concept, it's been around since the 1880s and 1890s. And people actually run around Shasta looking for the hidden entrance into the underground Lemurian city. And so, again.
And what is a Lemurian?
Oh, the Lemurians are the Pacific equivalent of Atlantis. So, Plato's Atlantis and the Atlanteans. Well, apparently there was another sunken civilization in the Pacific, if you believe these things. And when their civilization sank, they understood California lifestyle and moved in under Shasta.
And there's allegedly, according to lore, a hidden.
And there are reports of people finding the best mystery, the ones you never find. The mystery is just a marvelous excuse to have an adventure. And this is one where you can have the adventure of looking for it without the distraction of ever actually finding it.
So Paul, why is Shasta the magic mountain? Is it because it's isolated? I mean, there's a long history of cults and rumors, and there's something, if you take off in an airplane on a clear day from San Francisco, the furthest thing you can see is the white tip of Mount Shasta. So it does have a kind of iconic Mount Fuji kind of quality, but it seems to attract a lot of interest from people that believe in weirdness.
Mountains do that. A marvelous book you and I've talked about was Frank Waters wrote the book Kuchama and Sacred Mountains, talking exactly about this. And you think about Heinrich Messner and his alpinism. So all I can say about Shasta is that the indigenous peoples of California had legends about it that went way, way, way back. So.
All right, we'll move on from the aliens. Now this is Cape Mendocino, excuse me, and the old lighthouse site. What happened to the lighthouse?
It was sliding down the cliff. If you look, there's evidence of a landslide there. This is the westernmost point in continental US, and nobody ever goes there. It's an easy little walk. The hardest part is finding parking. And the lighthouse was a prefab lighthouse they put here. Part of the problem is they put it too high up, and so the light shone into the fog instead of out to sea. But it sat there for many years, and then they lifted it off because it was sliding into the Pacific, and it now sits next to the runway at Shelter Cove. So you can do a twofer. Go visit the lighthouse site, beautiful views, and say you're further west than anybody else, and then drop into Shelter Cove and check out the airport and see the lighthouse restored.
I think that both of you are runway and kind of hidden airport fans. My dad feels the same way about California piers. Is there something about collecting? Do you check these locations off your list if it's landing strips or caves in California? Do you kind of keep track in your mind of how many of these you make it to?
Oh, I think there are people that do it, that have kind of like a bird list of places that they've been to. And, like you say, it could be piers, it could be runways. I mean, I'm a amateur pilot, not a professional, but every place there's a runway, it's no fun to land in Long Beach. Anyone can do that, but to land in Shelter Cove, you're kind of landing almost like an aircraft carrier. There's a town there. And so it would be, several days journey to drive there. But if you have a friend with a small plane, you can get there in a couple of hours, and then you're in this place that's really quite remote. And yeah, I'm kind of attracted to places with airports, I have to admit, but they're just interesting. There's a lot of places where you don't think, like, why in the world would they have an airport here? Who goes here? But if there is one, it lets you, it's kind of a shortcut to get into the country.
Sure. Well, there are all sorts of abandoned runways. Will and I have talked about. There's one in the hills behind Año Nuevo Island that nobody knows why it was there. And more generally, I think we're all just big, dumb, crazy squirrels who like to collect stuff and talk about it. And so one really fun way to do this with mysterious spots is to do geocaching, where you run around to hidden spots. You have the pleasure of discovering it, a little bit of history. I actually, there's a geocache in our canyon here on the peninsula, the last stagecoach robbery in the Bay Area in 1904. So check out geocaching.
I also think there's a attraction to going to places that are maybe difficult to get to or remote, or where there are fewer people. I mean, a well-trodden path, Central Park can be beautiful, Yosemite can be beautiful, even in the bottom of the valley. But it's kind of fun to see, where would you go to kind of get away from the madding crowds. And Doug Robinson, who writes for us, used to say that, the fewer people you see, it goes down as the square of the distance from the nearest road. So the further you get from a road, the fewer people you run into, and then it goes as the cube of the altitude change. So if you find a place that's distant from a road and there's some height gain, you're going to be in the wilderness much, much faster.
Yeah, and on the search and rescue side, I will add, it's like the old axiom that, having a winch on the front of your four-wheel drive Jeep just allows you to get stuck further in. And with ever higher performance hiking gear and GPS electronics, it allows people to get in trouble deeper in the wilderness.
I completely agree. A winch kind of makes you take chances you would not otherwise have taken. So you're just more likely to get stuck.
Well, I would not want to get stuck here. This is the Stanford Mausoleum. Why is this? How did this make the list?
It's weird. Nobody ever goes there. I mean, I'm on campus a lot, obviously. And it was only because of the untimely death of Leland Stanford that we have Stanford University. And I would imagine a great number of Stanford students spent years on campus and never go visit it. So,
Not even at Halloween. I would think it would be
well,
kind
there
of
is this party on Halloween, but we're not supposed to talk about that.
oh, there's a hidden California for you, the Halloween party at the Stanford Mausoleum.
Skull and Bones at Stanford.
Okay, no, this is Sir Francis Drake's fake brass plate.
Oh, yes.
Right.
No, well, so Francis Drake landed somewhere along the West Coast. Most probably, it seems, here at Point Reyes in Drake's Estero to haul his ship ashore and clean it up. And it is said that he left a brass plate, brassa, B-R-A-S-S-E, which is actually bronze. And of course, all the records of the Drake expedition were promptly kept as a state secret and burned when the fire in London. And there was a professor at Cal who would say to all the students, remember, Drake's plate is out there somewhere. And so what happened in the 1930s is some folks created a fake plate for their professor. And they had all sorts of heavy hints that it was a joke. This was actually a piece of brass from the shipyard in Oakland. And I won't go into the details. You can see it on the web. It was just a comedy of errors. And it was eventually exposed as a fake, even though the Bancroft Library had it on display in pride of place. Yes, so as all of us at Stanford take great pride in this. And Stanford, we actually have the documentation in our rare books room of the fake. But anyway, the bottom line is the real plate's still out there somewhere, and it's probably somewhere in this picture. So
you think there really was a plate?
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, Hal Cute wrote, Drake said he left a plate. So that part is true. And again, this is one of these marvelous mysteries for a wonderful excuse to take hikes around Drake's Estero, and you don't ever have to worry about the inconvenience of actually finding it because it's probably several feet underground.
Well, I have a metal detector if anyone wants to borrow it. All right, speaking of my boss flying airplanes, this is the Resolution crash site, which this is a really funky old photo. Paul, can you tell us about this?
This was I think it was a DC-6, and it clipped the top of the mountain coming into SFO in the 1950s. And there's a small monument to it in the Corte de Madera Park. And it's a hidden place because it's just far enough off that you gotta know that you're going there. But it's been wonderfully preserved. There are still bits of metal on the ground, and there's a monument to the victims of it, and also beautiful views out towards Monterey Bay and the like. So it's historic, it's mysterious, it's got artifacts, leave them there, please. And it's also really family friendly.
It has artifacts still there.
It's something you can hike to, Paul?
Easy hike. Couple miles.
Oh, interesting. Look at this guy holding the shoe. That's just, ooh.
They had a whole different attitude towards emergency response back then.
I guess so. Now, this is the Derose Winery, and what made this special is it's right on the San Andreas Fault.
Yeah, so the fault is running across the middle of the picture, and what you're looking at is a drainage ditch that used to be perfectly aligned, but the fault creep is knocking it off. And so this is a chance to see plate tectonics in action. And the Derose Winery has been there forever. Inside the winery, there's a wall being shifted. They're not real thrilled to have looky-loos there, but if you stop and buy a bottle of wine, they will be happy to let you look around. And as you can see, there's a nice little picnic area where you can have lunch right on top of the fault.
Hey, Paul, you're a student of these things. Is this kind of geology moving a few millimeters every year, or are there sudden, breaks or both?
Well, a little bit. It basically is moving about as fast as your fingernails will grow. And so to get a sense of this, if you visit pinnacles up here in Northern California.
Yeah.
And then you go down to Neenah, sort of up above Palmdale, below Palmdale. Those two used to be connected. That's how offset they are.
Wow.
But sometimes it does move all at once, like in 1906. The most frightening thing for me, though, is that I live just on the east side of the San Andreas Fault, and all of Los Angeles is on the west side of the fault. And that means that Los Angeles is steadily getting closer to us. And in about 12 million years, San Francisco will be a suburb of LA.
That's terrifying. Wallace Creek, also another kind of fault line here.
Yeah, as long
Where
as
is
we're
this?
on faults. This is in the Carrizo Plain, and it's well marked. There's parking, and it's a walk up the hill, but you got to know that it's there. And creeks usually go straight downhill. Notice this one goes down, hangs a hard right, then hangs a hard left. And you can see a little spot beyond it. It used to go even further. This is where the fault is literally right lateral slip is bending the creek. And this is a scientifically important spot because Stanford professor Carey, excuse me, not Stanford professor, Caltech professor Carey C. did all of his key studies of the San Andreas here. So it's scientifically important, earth science lesson for your kids, easy to get to.
Here, this is Big Sur, and there are a number of secret spots, hidden spots that made both of your lists kind of in this general area. So can you touch upon when in the Big Sur area, where should we go?
Will, you want to start?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, the whole area just has marvelous sort of, I noticed that when we asked Alta readers, to list their favorite places in California, Big Sur was in the top 3 or 4. Always. And, it's a literary, I used to like to drive the coast, even though it was slower getting down to Central California, because you would pass through, Monterey and Carmel, which have their history, and then Big Sur and Henry Miller's place and Nepenthe and Lawrence Ferlinghetti had a little cabin just underneath the bridge that you can see in this photo where
I think I have
Kerouac wrote the novel Big Sur. And
this is this the Henry Miller?
That's the Henry Miller Memorial Library, not to be missed.
So
in the Big Sur area.
I mean, no one drives down the coast to get to LA faster or drives up to get to San Francisco faster. You go
well, except the twerps and the Porsches.
and the Winnebagos. But
yeah, no, I mean, the things to hit in Big Sur. Henry Miller Memorial Library is a must. Stop by Jade Cove. You might get lucky and find some jade. What else? Partington Creek, there's this cool tunnel that runs through to a hidden cove where they claim they did tan bark, but in fact it was rum running. And
I would
almost every
at,
turn in Big Sur.
I would stop in Nepenthe for their bad food and the sort of sense of 1960s are preserved in aspect there, but beautiful views.
Okay, let's go to the Honda Point disaster site.
The worst peacetime naval disaster in U.S. history, and 7 destroyers ran aground. Three made it out to sea because of a navigational error. And the guy who saved the 3 destroyers, the skipper who saved the 3 destroyers, was later court-martialed for disobeying orders and not going on the rocks. And it's at a wonderful spot. It's a little spot on the beach in the middle of Vandenberg, and you can drive out there. And still see bits.
What is left to see, Paul?
Well, the rudder, the propeller of the lead boat, the Delphi, is at the museum there. But there's a monument, and you can still see bits of ship out there.
Oh, cool! Shipwrecks are very popular. People love a shipwreck,
right? Unless you're in
it. Sure, I've never been in one. So the Carrizo Bean was on both of your lists. What's so special about this place?
Well,
and
I'm a big fan of this area because it's not really all that remote, and yet it just sort of falls between the cracks. On the right side, on the east side, you've got Highway 5, which is the big north-south thing, and on the left side, you've got Highway 101, and then there's this kind of middle ground. And I remember first reading about it in Soda Lake, and there are pronghorn antelope in this area, and it was really an empty quarter in the middle of California. which you'd expect there to be remote places in the far north or in the desert somewhere, but this is really right in the middle of California. It is kind of relatively unknown. It's not mountainous, there's no glaciers, but it's a really beautiful little sort of miniature Serengeti.
Oh,
And
interesting.
it's not that hard to get to. And now it's been developed partly as a solar farm.
Unfortunately.
So you have this weird juxtaposition of kind of modern space age looking stuff, and then this very antique, quiet, and you can walk there.
And the hidden places here is that people who go there, very few people get more than 100 yards off the pavement. And I'm not saying any details, but boy, oh boy, there's some really magical hidden places in here.
I think the Nature Conservancy ended up collecting a lot of the land that had been agricultural or ranch land, and now there's a kind of a national monument there, so it'll probably be protected for a long time to come. But the Travers Ranch is there, and the solar farm. Soda Lake is an interesting remnant of bygone times, and it's an easy drive. If you're in Paso Robles, you head east. If you're in Taft, you head west. It's not that hard to find.
Speaking of the kind of intersection of nature and technology, where is this?
This looks like the Allen telescope.
Yes.
This is a picture I took up at Hat Creek. This is the Hat Creek Telescope Array that the SETI project has been using to look for evidence of intelligent life. And they gave up on looking for intelligent life on Earth. They're just looking outwards. You ever notice that, Will, that
oh, come on,
all the searches are outwards?
I feel like we need a drum roll, Paul.
But Hat Creek, this area is amazing. And there's Bernie Falls to the north. Again, it's just enough off of the beaten path that you gotta be purposeful about going there.
It's not hard to find. You know, this started out as a serious, I think, Caltech and UCB radio astronomy site. And then the SETI people were able to get access to some of the land, and they got money from Paul Allen, the founder of Microsoft, to sort of build this machine that just scans the sky for sort of patterns in radio transmission that might be a signal of intelligent life. And they've been doing it for what, 20 or 30, 40
years. Well, and actually, I mean, this site's still worth visiting, but they actually moved a bunch of these scopes out to an even more hidden site on the east side of Owens Valley that is really cool. And one can find it.
There's another radio astronomy observatory there.
We did a big piece on Owens Valley that, didn't we, Will?
The long wavelength. Yeah, that's a very, very clever. You know, it turns out that in building a telescope, the instrument, the thing you see, is very expensive, but the digital electronics has gotten cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So if you're building a modern telescope, you want to throw as much computing power at the problem and not have to spend a lot of money on the actual receivers. So that's what went on. That's why I wrote about that.
The brilliant design of this thing was it was basically made out of old television satellite receivers.
Yeah. But you know, it's what do you think, Paul, that they've been unable to find even a twinkling, flashing light from? I mean, is there
that you know of?
Oh, there's an easy answer. It's that they remember our television signals preceded our search, and so if their intelligence is out there, they looked at our TV signals and decided they better be very, very quiet.
Well, yeah, and I guess the speed of light lets you only look so far back in time. But you remember Frank Drake used to make this calculation that there's so many stars and so many galaxies and so many planets, and therefore the probability of intelligent life being out there was relatively significant. And so it shouldn't be all that hard to find it. But so far, you know, we've been throwing strikes.
Well, I love that the West is where we are. The West is looking.
When the aliens arrive, they're coming in the West first, probably Shasta.
Back to Earth here in Cedarville, California. I love the idea, and I'm going to plow through the rest of these slides really quickly so we can get to questions. But I love the ideas of really off the beaten trail, small businesses. This is the floating island bookstore where I've never been in Cedarville.
This is a tiny little town in the far upper right of California. I found the town because there's an airport there. And I was kind of curious, like, why would it, what goes on in this town? And there's a bookstore. So even though I haven't been to this bookstore, they exist. They have a website, and it looks like a reason to visit Cedarville. And, I love, to own a bookstore in the year 2021 is kind of a passion project. And whether it's the Point Reyes bookstore up in Point Reyes or Book Passage or Books Inc. or anybody that is still doing books, running a bookstore, it's a phenomenon. And I think reading is something that's interesting, which is why Alta believes that we should, print something and distribute it to readers. Books still exist, bookstores still exist. So I just thought this was kind of a little shrine of civilization in a very remote part of the world.
I'll second that. There are secrets that when you discover them, you should keep the secret. And there are other secrets that when you discover them, you should share them as much as possible. And bookstores are the secret to share. And if you can't make it all the way up to Cedarville, remember Point Reyes books. That's a wonderful secret in our backyard.
Please share your secret bookstores or your favorite bookstores that we should all that we probably don't know about and should in the comments.
So it would make a good article for Alta, small surviving bookstores.
Yeah, well, we do love Point Reyes books very much. Okay, Rodent Crater, can we get to this? And will we fall in?
Well, Rodent Craters, I know Paul doesn't like the term, but it's on my bucket list. It's someplace I would really like to
It's on
visit.
mine too.
But it's kind of a closed site now because the artist who is constructing this kind of earth art piece has closed it to people that aren't significant patrons of his work. And I'm dying to go. If you go to the website, you can get inspired by why it might be fun to go there. But it's partly Star Trek, it's partly Mars, it's partly beautiful mystical art. It's just something I'd love to go. There's a side of me that wants to kind of break in at night and just see it. But I think
where is it exactly?
It's in the middle of the
Rodent Crater is up in northeast Arizona, and it's James Terrell's project, and it's a wonderful story that you can see on the web. I'll put the link up. But yes, no, it's not open to the public yet, but it's quite amazing, and the pictures are really inspiring.
I want to talk about that, Will, that you mentioned that, not the bucket list thing, but, or perhaps Paul mentioned it, that there are certain secrets worth keeping and certain secret spots worth sharing. Where is your line that you draw there? I know that we all have and I'll reveal, I feel that way about San Quentin Beach, which is the most marvelous little beach in Marin County that's right at the entrance to San Quentin Prison. You need to park kind of near where the visitors to the prison park. But I've always been a little bit nervous about sharing it because it's so special. How do you guys draw the line at which of your spots you share?
And Paul will probably give his own articulate answer, but I guess I feel it's a fragility question. If a lot more visitors would ruin the part of the experience, then I would be disinclined to share it. But if it's a place that's really open to the public and people just don't know about it, it's a little bit off the beaten track, then I kind of feel like it's okay to talk about it and promote it and share it because it's fun. It's like, almost everything in life is more fun if you share it with your close friends. And I kind of feel then it's okay. But if it's fragile or more people going there would ruin it, then I would tend to shut down.
I know, I agree with that. That the way I think about it, part of it's remember that famous observation by American philosopher Yogi Berra, it's too crowded, nobody goes there anymore. That it's two things. One, there are some places that are just legitimately amazing and so fragile you should never talk about them. There are other places where lots of people go, but it's still a mystery because the density isn't too high, like Botte. Going to the ghost town of Botte, it's a protected park and the like, and but it's left undisturbed. Of course, in no small part because everybody knows about the Botte curse. We've talked about that, haven't we, Will? If you take so much as a rock from Botte, you are going to have horrible, horrible luck. And they get just steady streams of little packages. People writing notes of apology said, I took this nail from Botte and my aunt died of cancer and my dog was hit by a car and everything else. Now, a little secret, don't tell anybody, but the Botte curse was started by a frustrated ranger who put the word out. But turns out it's real.
Oh, the
I
power of
remember
suggestion.
going hiking one time with Doug Robinson, and we started out at Tenaya Lake, which is on the main road in Yosemite. And then we started on that trail that goes up to Clouds Rest, which is a main trail, but you go not very far on that trail, you stop running into people. And then Doug knew a spur trail that went off in another direction. And it kind of followed the rule. You know, you can be in a place that's very well visited and just move a little bit off and then a little bit further, and you're in real wild wilderness. And I remember we ended up camping at a place that had obviously been a campsite. And Doug said, you know, this campfire is so old. This is a 19th century campfire. Nobody's been here in 100 years.
Yeah.
So that wasn't more than 2.5 hours from the main road, but there was some elevation gain and some knowledge and a little bit of willingness to, you know, turn around the corner that people don't turn.
I want to make sure that we give shout outs to Bart's Books in Ojai, Beers Books in Sacramento. We're getting some great suggestions here. Treehorn Books in Santa Rosa, Last Bookstore in LA.
This is an article in the making.
By the way, one thing we should just, so we're a little California centric, another mystery in plain sight that is just delightful is the Prada store in Marfa.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Everybody look it up. We don't even need to describe it. You can find about it. It's just hilarious.
Marfa's a whole
Yeah,
other
exactly.
world. Underground Books in Sacramento, Librio Schmibrios, Lending Library in East LA. These are great.
And Will, we talk. Oh, sorry, Beth, you go ahead.
Well, before we run out of time, I want to get to a question that's Lisa asks, and hi, Lisa, who comes to every Alta Live. I just love you. How have the wildfires, drought, climate change, these very immediate things that have been happening in California and the West changed your exploration of the West?
Well, that's a very good question. I got to think about that. We had a big fire down in Central California in a place that I like to visit. And I noticed two things. One was that the fire traced almost exactly the same path as a fire that had taken place in the 1960s. So there are fire channels, there are fire places, there are fire pathways. That is something to know. I don't know what that means or what to do with that, but it was extraordinary how close it came. We even found trees that had burned, but the inner core of the tree had burned in the 1960s fire. So that's one thing. Secondly, the recovery from fire is fire's older than human beings are. So fire's been here for a long time, and maybe we have more fires and climate change, but fire itself is something that nature has experienced historically. It's interesting what happens. The big trees either die or they recover relatively quickly. The grasslands recover within 12 months. And the brush, the creosote and the mesquite, that stays blackened for 20 years. So the recovery from fire is a very non-linear sort of process. So yeah. I guess there are places where I could go where there was a fire 2 years ago and hardly notice that there'd been a fire there. And there's places I could go where there was a fire 20 years ago and it looks like it was last week. So I don't have a good answer to the question, but it's a complex question.
So, I mean, I take fire seriously. I was actually part of the emergency response at a couple of our fires and doing body recoveries of missing persons. So I don't take it lightly. The good news is fire opens up the space. For starters, if you're a mushroom hunter, the place to look for morels is up in the Sierras right after a fire. And also, so I've helped look for lost Native American pictographs here in California. And I actually was part of a team. We found one of the last baskets to be found in California, now in the Santa Barbara Museum. Right after a fire happens, that's the time to go look for lost Indian sites and lost roads. Will and I have talked forever about a certain missing trail. And I suspect if that area ever burns, we will be hot-footing it up to find it.
I do want to, want to dive in. The floating island bookstore that we talked about in Cedarville was actually created by Michael Sykes, who once owned Point Reyes Books. And we have that tidbit from Malcolm Margolin, who wrote, I'm going to tie it all together, who wrote The Ohlone Way, which I studied in California history at St. Ignatius in San Francisco.
And don't miss Deep Hanging Out, his new book. He totally blew my schedule apart. I lost a whole evening reading it cover to cover.
Well,
We love you,
Malcolm is a
Malcolm.
real patron saint of anyone that cares about books, and he was the founder of Heyday. And I heard a quote attributed to him that I'm not sure is accurate. Maybe he can clarify that when Heyday was a for-profit and when it was a not-for-profit, he made the same amount of money.
We are past time and our huge crowd is still staying. So my last question to both of you is, can you offer there's tons to explore in the West, but for those who don't, particularly now during the pandemic, want to travel that far, what are your tips for finding hidden gems, to overuse that phrase, in our own backyard? I know that one of the tips that Paul, you had offered earlier was kind of getting in touch with your own historical society, which I have never done in my town. So can you offer kind of some beginner explorer advice?
Sure.
Well,
You want to go first, Will?
Well, there's all kinds of great guidebooks, and the older the guidebook, the more interesting. Even the WPA guides to different parts of the West that were published in the 1930s and been republished are great places to sort of get the historical context and to maybe prospect for interesting places. And I remember becoming very interested in the route that Jedediah Smith had followed, going across the West, and when he was eventually killed down in sort of the Oklahoma country. And to my surprise, there's a Jedediah Smith Society, and there are people. So the internet is a vast memory archive if you do a little bit of detective work to find interesting places that are interesting to you. And then in many cases, you can actually go there, even though it may not be a national park. So I would start with guidebooks.
Visit your local historic society. There's usually a lonely librarian there who will love to tell you everything. Look up the old Huell Hauser videos of California byways. There are also some classic 1960s and 70s guides. Look up the name Russ Liederbrand, California byways. Definitely do geocaching. There now Desert Magazine is all online. You can look at that. And in general, look for penumbras. Sometimes the most empty spots are not way out in the wilderness. They're just outside the areas that everybody visits, like Will was saying about Doug Robinson. There's a spot in my canyon. There's a cave that I think I'm the first person to visit in over 100 years. And so just getting a little bit off, looking at top of Mount Diablo, ever here, well,
I have
I'll
a
stop.
question for you, Paul. No, because you touched on something that you had talked about with me once before, which is the historical markers and the clampers. I mean, if you got just a list of those and use it as a kind of launch point for your own exploration, you'd have
never drive by a historical marker without stopping.
Yeah, I saw one the other day on the Halone Road, and I stopped and I thought, oh, I didn't know that. It's interesting. The other thing I think, Paul, if I can double back to a question that was asked earlier, was about when to talk about things and when not. One example of things that I feel to not talk about is petroglyphs. And it's not because they're hard to find, or if you were really interested, you couldn't find someone to show you, but because there's vandalism. And so if you made it too public, you'd be exposing a precious, fragile thing to people that don't feel as strongly about it.
And that's how we lost, giant rock. They're painted rock in the Carrizo. It was a 200-foot long polychrome pictograph site, and a bunch of drunk oil workers in the 1920s went out there with shotguns and destroyed most of it. So yeah, if you run across petroglyphs, don't talk about it. If it's fragile, keep your mouth shut, or just lie through your teeth and send them in the opposite direction.
Or send email to Paul Saffo and he'll tell you about it.
Well, I think on that note, that it's, your passion for this is matched by your respect for these special places and how, going forward, I think for all of us, if we go explore these places, we have learned how to best explore them safely, responsibly, and respectfully, as well as how to buy books at hidden bookstores. Please check the chat. There are really Kelly's Books in Watsonville. Everyone has got these Village Books in Bellingham, Washington, Walden Pond Books in Oakland, also Owl and Company Bookstore in Oakland. And a shout out to the Roof.
There's lots of local bookstores right here in San Francisco and LA. I mean, Vroman's in LA is an Alta partner, and Book Soup and Diesel,
Yes.
and there's a good bookstore out in the Haight that's, a wonderful bookstore with a long, strong tradition of finding and promoting literature.
Yes, we
You
should
can
also
generalize that out. Support the keepers of the secrets. Buy wine at the Derose Winery. Buy books at Point Reyes Books. Read Malcolm's new book.
Yeah.
Read
Support the
Alta.
keepers of the secrets is great though. And so with that, I want to invite everyone to 2 more Alta Lives. Next week, Max Chafkin is going to talk to us about his new biography of Peter Thiel. How do you pronounce Peter Thiel's name? Peter Thiel?
Close enough.
All right.
It works.
And that's a week from today. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to get back to Hidden California. We've created in this issue 10 guides to different corners of California, a little more on the beaten path than what we talked about today, less secret, but guides for getting to know, if you're unfamiliar with San Diego, Owens Valley, Northern Coast. We're going to talk to Farley Elliott about all of those. So please do join us. We'll send you invites to all of that. I had so much fun. I always have fun talking to you both, but I'm so grateful, Will and Paul, for your sharing your knowledge on this today. It was really, really fun. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Just remember,
Paul.
keep those secrets.
That's my closing phrase for today. I'm so grateful to everyone. Stay safe and stay in touch. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.